Hey, John Gilroy here. Private sector fraud rates are around 3%. Public sector operates at about a 20% fraud rate. Today, let's find some solutions. Hit the music, Manny. Welcome to the Federal Tech Podcast, the podcast that connects you to federal technology leaders. My name is John Gilroy, and I'll be your moderator in the virtual studio today. World famous Haywood Talcove, CEO of LexisNexis Special Services. His buddies call him Woody, and we call him number one. And what's it, number one in the program and number one in the field when it comes to helping out the government reduce fraud? Wow, that's a tough job.
I wish my family thought as much about me as that introduction was, John. I mean, that was pretty good, especially since when we first met in 2008, and I wouldn't even talk on your show.
Yeah. Well, I'll expect a $20 bill in the mail after that introduction. World famous. Maybe it's another $20 bill, huh? Well, I think this popped up on the radar during COVID, and everyone read the headlines. They pop up their phone, and they read the headlines of all this fraud, waste, and abuse. And that's almost like a triad of words that there's the keywords for the federal government: fraud, waste, and abuse. And I think it's like so many things, a lot of people talking about it, not many people doing much about it. And I wanted to bring you in today and just talk about it some more. And in doing my research, I came up with this number, the fraud rate. I mean, is this really true? 20% fraud rate in the federal government? That seems just crazy high.
Yeah, it's like every time I do some analysis and really dig into the numbers, it's always about 20%. Now, the funny part is when you look at the research that gets done by different agencies, you know, for example, prior to COVID, the unemployment insurance agencies would talk about their fraud rate being 0.1%. The USDA would talk about their fraud rate being 0.1%. John, I used to always say to myself, how in the world is it always 0.1%? Like, is that the magic number? And I realized that they came up with that number because it didn't make any sense to do fraud prevention if the fraud rates were that low. But during the pandemic, the story imploded. You know, within 2 weeks of that money going out, you had more people signing up for unemployment insurance than you had residents of a state that were over the age of 18. You saw innocent people that needed benefits whose information was stolen, and they couldn't get their benefits. And I think it was the first time since I've been here, which is almost 19 years, that people had that uh-oh moment. Houston, we got a real problem.
Wow, it's just surprising. And when it comes to, I mean, if I ever use my credit card, they have so much strict controls over consumers using credit cards and making sure I'm there. And if I all of a sudden buy a couch, they go, whoa, you don't spend ever over $1,000, and they'll slap it back there. So what I see is happening is that the federal government has not taken advantage of some of the tools that commercial companies have because that's how they get evaluated on. Is that just what's going on? They're just not using those tools?
Yeah, I mean, like everything, there are so many explanations, and a lot of the points are good, right? Now, one of the challenges in government is you're dealing with people that are 18 years old, and then you're dealing with my mom, who's 84 and still has a flip phone. So, like, when you're a bank, you get to choose your customer. When you're government, you don't, and there's a whole bunch of different skill sets in there. The other challenge you get in fairness is in most of these programs, whether it's an IRS tax refund or it's an EBT benefit or it's a benefit with the Social Security Administration, there's statutes that obligate payments quickly. And so you have these really hard bureaucrats that are trying to do the right thing. But what's happened over the past decade is the fraud has changed. And I'm going to tell you a story in a second. But the way it's changed is these criminal groups have entered the mix, right? Like I've always said, like if someone is cheating on their EBT application and they're lying that they have more than $50 in their checking account, just let it go. It's not worth it. What you want to stop are the criminal groups that are organized that are stealing data off the dark web, that are now taking advantage of AI to create fake images and fake documents. And then they're able to obfuscate some of the tools that are in place by government that aren't as good as in the private sector, right? The other piece, and I did a great op-ed. I thought it was one of the best ones we had ever done. And we talked about the incentive structure. The incentive structure in government is not to stop fraud. The incentive structure in government is to get payments out. And I quoted Warren Buffett, if you want to understand behavior, understand incentives. And I think that is definitely part of it. But what's happened, John, is the federal budget deficit is $37 trillion and growing about $2 trillion a year. It's 6% of GDP. That is completely unsustainable, regardless of how you feel politically. It's likely a combination of raising taxes and cutting spending. And if you use some of these tools that are really simple, not only will you stop improper payments and fraud, but you'll also make it better for the individuals who own the real identities that can't get benefits. So I used to, like, as I've been on this journey and talking about it, I always talked about the criminal groups. And I haven't really shared this story, but I'll give it to you. Unfortunately, my dad passed away 2 years ago. He was 86 years old, been married to my mom for 64 years. Very traditional marriage. John, mom never paid a bill in her life. Dad did everything. You know, mom was devastated. When my dad passed, he had a life insurance that my mom was entitled to. And filled out the paperwork. The check got sent. My mom deposits it in her bank. And she calls me a couple days later. She calls me Haywood. Woody, she does not appreciate that. And she says, Haywood, my money's missing. And I'm like, relax, Mom. It's in the bank. And I'm like, how do you know? Well, I called the 800 number up. I put my account number in, and it's not there. Ma, just I'm sure it's there. You go to the bank. And she went to the bank, and she called me from the bank in hysterical. The money's really gone, Haywood. It's gone. And they said there's nothing they can do. And so I drove over to the bank, and the manager was like, no, this happens every day. You know, did you take it by mistake? Did a family member take it by mistake? Did your mother open up an account at a brokerage firm jointly with this individual? I'm like, ma'am, my mom doesn't know how to do that. And in fact, the way she gets her balance is she uses your telephone system, right? She doesn't even know what a brokerage account is. I was like, well, we got to call the police. No need to call the police. I'm like, there is no way we're not calling the police. And I was fortunate to know some of the police down here in Palm Beach, and they came over. We were able to get to the brokerage firm, and we were able to figure out who the individual was that created a joint account and literally moved my mom's money from her checking account to the brokerage account. Then we needed to get the money back. And so, you know, these government agencies that you think are out there to help you, no. So I call up the CFPB. Remember, they're the ones that are supposed to help consumers when they're having a problem with a financial transaction. First of all, John, I wait on hold for 2.5 hours. Huh. I finally get to a person, and I explain I have power of attorney over my mother. This is what happened. I need you to call this bank. I need you to have them release that money back into my mom's account. Well, I'm sorry, Mr. Talcove. Your power of attorney doesn't work with the CFPB. We have a special power of attorney that you need to complete. That'll take about 4 weeks. Now, meanwhile, my mother is telling me she'd rather be dead than go through this. She just lost her husband of 64 years mentally. My mom can't take it, and she's not kidding. No. Right? And just to move this along, what ended up happening was the teller at the bank gave my mom's information to her boyfriend. And that's how they opened up the account. It was the 11th time that fraud had occurred at that bank. Until I went through that, I never talked about the victim. But behind every one of these frauds, when your information is stolen and I file a fake tax return, when your data is stolen and I get an EBT card in your name, there was an innocent individual that was entitled to a benefit that didn't get it. And because of the lack of controls and processes that these government agencies currently have, the victim is treated like a criminal, and the criminal never gets caught. So here's a stat for you. During the pandemic, depending on whose number you believe, I like my number, it's $250 billion. How much of that money has actually been recovered and returned to the U.S. Treasury? Do you want to guess?
Yeah, I'm guessing 10%. I mean, that's, and that's pretty pessimistic.
Yeah, $7 billion.
Wait a minute, out of 250 with a B billion?
Yes.
Wow.
Once the money's out, it never comes back.
Yeah.
And most of the time, it's not even in this country anymore. It's Russia, it's China, Nigeria, Romania, North Korea. It's gone, and it's used for horrible things. So that's why I'm so passionate about it, right? Like you got to protect people that use the programs. You got to put some of these basic tools in place, and you got to make it harder for criminals and easier for people like my mom who are entitled to things at her age.
Now, there are people listening to this podcast who maybe know a little bit about the federal government, and they're going to say, now, hold a minute there, Woody. Didn't NIST come up with some kind of like a identity management or digital identity system, and they've updated that over the years? Doesn't that play some kind of role in this?
Yeah, so you're going to get me in trouble. This is why they like people listening and watching me when I do these interviews. So you talk about NIST 863. That only recently got updated, and it still doesn't include some very important elements around AI and data sharing that are absolutely critical today. So the problem with the standard bodies is the criminals now are moving much, much faster, right? So, how you do, for example, I can send you some of these via email, getting a fake driver's license off of the dark web or even Telegram right now is going to cost you $5. In fact, I purchased one and I've used it before at the airport, and it works.
Wow.
You can now create that fake license on AI, and unless you're using the most current technology, you're not going to catch it. People would talk about deep fakes, individuals, and like someone like you, that's your voice is out there, your face is out there. The technology has gotten exponentially better than it was even 6 months ago. So NIST is a starting point, but what I fear is people end up relying on that as, well, if I follow NIST, then I'm in compliance and I'm not going to get in trouble. What they're not doing is checking their beneficiary population to see if they got through. Hey, here's a great example. So, yesterday, the Secret Service announced that telecommunications takedown in New York City, the SIM card farm. That operation, the individuals that were responsible for that, likely a criminal group from overseas, spent at least $2 million to put in that place. And they had, I think the number was 100,000 SIM cards. And there's likely, as that story evolves, there's going to be a story about how there was a dirty operator who was able to swap out or associate John Gilroy with that SIM card, which would blow apart multi-factor authentication as we currently use it, especially using the SIM card. These I suspect that SIM card farm was used for both government and commercial fraud. And you'll notice the Secret Service shut it down, and then immediately the Department of Homeland Security is doing an investigation, and they're going to go through each of those SIM cards. That is what you're dealing with. And when you look at a standard like NIST, even with the updated standards, how would it address that specific issue? It just doesn't hit the nail on the head. right? That's why I keep on saying, private sector 3%, government 20%. Just go look at what the private sector is doing and port it over to the government, and you will be in a much better place.
Over at the DoD, we're not going to focus there, but they have this thing called CMMC where they're trying to make their vendors be more secure. And for years, they used to do self-attestation. And my joke was, wish I had that in math class in high school. I got straight A's in calculus. So self-attestation is a great fun thing to talk about, and I think they're getting away from that. However, there's some self-certification involved in some of this identity. It seems like, is this just a plague? Everyone's trying to do it. I mean, we'll trust old Woody.
If you think about it, right? And again, you have this very diverse group of people that are participating in government programs, an 18-year-old who is tech savvy to an 84-year-old mom who's not. And the problem is when you deal with some of this stuff, I want to make it easy. I just did a piece for the Chicago Tribune. In the One Big Beautiful Bill, there's a lot of changes going on in the EBT SNAP program. And if your error rate is over 11%, what happens in the case of Illinois, they'll have to pay about $800 million a year back to the USDA, or they'll have to subsidize the SNAP program. So one of the fun things I've said, so maybe there's some policymakers here listening to this, some elected officials, just for fun, go to the state of Illinois EBT webpage and try to fill out the application. Okay. What you'll see is it's all not all. There's a ton of self-reported information. And then what you'll see, and I can share with you some of the links on Telegram, is how the criminals tell you to complete the form to get the benefit. So the simplest thing to do, for example, in Illinois, is to check that you're homeless. And once that box is checked, you just go right to the end and you're done, right? So like I said, for me personally, it's not about the individual that is cheating individually. It's the groups at scale. And what happens is they study these forms, they take advantage of the AI technology, and once they understand how you're making determination decisions, they will fill it out that way so they get through easier. A 16-page form, you should see some of the questions. How much money is in your checking account? List your last 9 jobs, the address, and your supervisor. Stuff that is just a legitimate individual that's really trying to follow the rules. They can't do it, but man, a criminal can crack it. So there should be, I always tell, I was talking to some senators a couple of weeks ago about this. I can go on Amazon and I can order something in one click. If I need a benefit, I should be able just to put my name in, validate my identity, and then look at different databases, both commercial and government, and see if eligible. Think about that for a second as it relates to the pandemic and PPP fraud. If they just looked on the do not pay list, they would have stopped. I think the number was $18 billion in improper payments. If they had just shared, and I know this is so controversial, but I completely agree with the IG Horowitz on fraud as a data sharing problem. If they had just shared within the SBA and the IRS the tax file information, then we would have been in a situation, John, where all those fake businesses that those people created to get those big loans would have been caught. The other part of it, self-reported information, is the Social Security Administration program for SSI, right? And, you check one box and say your assets are below that amount, we're not going to check, right? And the problem is the criminals all know this, and the legitimate people don't. Self-reported information is the plague on fraud. It makes it too easy for the criminals. The intent is right, but it just blows past all of the systems that have been put in place to stop the bad behavior.
I was watching some highlights of the Commanders game, and they had a couple of plays over the weekend, maybe saw them too, where someone got through the line. All of a sudden, they're gone 60 yards. And everyone's trying to chase them down. You just can't, that one, I think McNichols is going like 23 miles an hour, and they just couldn't catch up to him. So let's talk about this $250 million, and you recover 7%. And so what you're saying is that pay and chase ain't going to work. You have to stop them at the line. You're not going to chase them down. I mean, what are you going to do? Go to Romania and knock on someone's door? Hi, my name's Woody. I mean, really? I mean, this whole thing of pay and chase, maybe it gives people jobs, but it seems like there's got to be a better way to approach it, huh?
Yeah, and it's $250 billion, I think, was lost. $7 billion was stolen. Yeah, no, it doesn't work. And if you believe me or come close to believing me, where most of this is overseas, you got these great individuals in the United States Secret Service. You're putting their lives at risk every single time you have to go bust one of these groups. So it's just not worth it, right? It's scary. I mean, we participated in operations with DHS, Secret Service, USDA, and you are talking about hardcore criminal actors that are stealing at scale, that have guns, that have weapons, that are tied to other really bad actors. So if you just think about it, if you just do some of the things that I always talk about, the first thing is you have to do front-end identity verification, right? You can't walk into the bank and say, hey, my name is John. I want to take $1,000 out of my checking account. There's going to be some verification that you're John. Then what you've got to do is you got to continue to look at your population on a regular basis. And I think, part of the issue is you need a critical individual in there, somebody maybe from law enforcement, an IG type that is trying to find trends and patterns, because the criminals don't stay static, right? If you're not going to get caught and you can steal literally hundreds of millions of dollars, then they are going to continue to try to find ways into the system, right? So you're always examining your back-end beneficiary pool. And then the other part of it, and it's hard, like the government procurement process takes a long time, and all of a sudden you are now getting AI attacks at scale, and it could take 8 months before they get a product in. Or, for example, some of the newer products that aren't FedRAMP certified. Well, getting FedRAMP certified today can take 2 years. For a company like Lexis, it's $15 to $20 million. How do you get those tools in? Because the private sector is putting them in at scale. And the other part of this dynamic, as the private sector buckles down, the public sector becomes an easier target. I can assure you, American Express cares a lot more about fraud, because every 12 weeks they got to report out to shareholders, than what happens in the government sector.
Just a terminology update, maybe I get it cleared. So there's identification, but then so authentication is just repeating it continuously to make sure 6 months ago. Is that the term that's used for that? Is that what?
Yeah. And I've always, it's one of my sort of pet issues. Just because you've authenticated once doesn't mean that you weren't a victim of the SIM farm takeover that is discovered in New York. You literally, every time you go into your account, you do want to get validated. So one of the things that you're seeing right now, and there's a couple of flavors of it, is multi-factor authentication. Some people still use the SIM MFA. I wouldn't use that right now. I think it's completely corrupted. But the other part of it is there's tools like, for example, at Lexis, we have a thing called threat metrics. And you can tell if it's the same device you came in on before. You can tell if you're coming in from about the same location. By location, I mean you're not coming in from China or North Korea, right? So you got to do that type of stuff every single time. For those of you that are listening, why is this important to me? It's an interesting policy question. The problem that we have today because people talk about data breaches all the time. And what I've said for the past 10 years is basically get over it. It's unfortunate. Your data's already been stolen. The only question is, has it been used, right? There is no putting that toothpaste back in the tube. And therefore, if you don't do some of the things that I'm talking about, like, for example, a server farm SIM swap, it's going to be a very automated process, John. And using behavioral type technologies, you'll be able to tell very quickly that it's a computer trying to log on, not a human, right? So there's so many things that you have to do today if you believe that premise. And, from that OPM breach, which got every single person and their families that had clearances, to the things that happened with other private companies and healthcare companies, it doesn't work anymore, right? Like, I could sit here today, go on the dark web, buy your name, your date of birth, your address. You're easy. I'm going to Google you. I'm going to get your picture. I'm now going to make a fake license, right? And I've got my SIM swap farm, and I'm going to go have a party. When you go to file your tax return, you're going to get a note back from the IRS that said, John, we already sent you a $9,000 refund check. And you're going to be like, but I owed money this year. And you're going to be tied up for 18 months untangling that. That is how easy it is if you don't use those technologies. And that's why I worry, like, with policymakers and elected officials that I speak to, the speed at which the fraud is adopting is faster than government is capable because of procurements, standards, and other things. It just leaves us all super vulnerable.
We are running out of time here.
No, we're just getting started. You said this is 6 hours.
No. Maybe other podcasts would do that, but I have a hard time holding an audience's attention for maybe 25 minutes if I can do that. So let's say one of our listeners is in the squat rack, maybe walking their dog or something, and they want to get more information. I'll spell LEXIS, NEXIS, Special Services. So do you have white papers there or videos, or what do you suggest maybe our listeners should get more information?
Yeah, if you go to LexisNexis.com, and what I would do is I would click on the link around identity, and I would take a really close look at that. Right. The other thing that I would do, and is for everyone that's listening to you, John, I would do 4 things. OK, as a consumer, to protect yourself. The number one thing is go to the credit bureaus and freeze your credit. Do not leave your credit open anymore. It's too dangerous. The second thing is the Postal Service has this thing called informed delivery. Go sign up for that before the criminals take your address. The third thing is if you own a property, you own a home, go to the county webpage and put an alert on your title. And then the fourth thing is make sure you have those text message alerts from your bank anytime there's a transaction, money coming in, coming out. If you let the FBI or the Secret Service know very quickly, even if it's headed to Russia, they can stop the transaction. So I would do those 4 things because you'll be better off than 80% of the population.
Oh, that's good practice. I'll list the link, and I'll list those suggestions on the show notes page for this. So one thing I got to ask is I went to your LinkedIn profile, and right your LinkedIn profile, under the headline, you say, catching bad people and enabling digital government. Well, that kind of sums up this interview, doesn't it?
Yeah, it is like having been on some of these operations and seeing the individuals that are stealing from the food insecure, that are stealing from the unemployed, that are stealing from the elderly. They do not deserve to be able to go out and go shopping in the mall every weekend. And everything that we do, I mean, I've been here for, like I said, almost 19 years, and we built something that protects the people that live in this country, that keeps them safer. You can be a security company, you can be a data company, you can be an analytic, you can be all these things. What we are is a company that brings together a whole bunch of different resources and does a whole bunch of different things. And if you bring all those things together, John, it makes it so hard for the criminals. You'll never get to 0. We can do better than 20, right? Yeah. Like if we can get it down to 5, can you imagine what we could do with an extra $500-600 million, billion a year?
Yeah. Yeah, that's the most impressive part about this interview. It's billions we're talking about, and it's just so shocking.
Yeah.
Well, unfortunately, here we have to end this conversation. You have been listening to the Federal Tech Podcast with John Gilroy. I'd like to thank my guest, Haywood Talcove, CEO of LexisNexis Special Services. That's LexisNexis. Great interview. Thanks, Woody.
Hey, John, appreciate you. Let's do this again before 2030.